Welcome, everybody, to the Zeroed In podcast, where we talk with the people helping to build smarter, safer, and more connected industry and manufacturing. Let's get zeroed in. Today, you've got myself, Ryan Kershaw. You've got Olivier Block here from Thing Zero. Alec Monaco is sitting in the background, making sure we stay on topic and everything looks nice. And our special guest today is Kudzai Manditereza from HiveMQ and all things educational when it comes to UNS and MQTT. Pleasure to have you on the show today, and looking forward to a good conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Ryan and Olivia. I'm really looking forward to, an interesting conversation with both of you. So happy to be here.
Great. Well, let's get things kicked off. I'll pass on all over to all of you for the first question to get things rolling on this one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, actually, the first thing I think would be in order would be for you because I'd tell us a little bit about your background and the role of having to, in the industry today, what you guys are proposing that we have a better understanding of who you are and what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my role at HiveMQ is a senior industry solutions advocate. So basically, I take care of the thought leadership and education for some of our customers and also for the community in general around the topics of Industry 4.0. So HiveMQ is a company based in Germany, founded in 2012, and so back then it was really more focused in the connected cars space. So with customers like your BMW and Mercedes Benz, and then it is and also for a good reason because back then MQTT was still not that much head of in industrial or manufacturing at all. So it only really started to make, headway around 2015, 2016. That's when it kind of like really became more popular. That's also the time when HiveMQ also started to make, inroads into industrial manufacturing. So the core product for for HiveMQ is the MQTT platform, which is the broker that has got all these um, integration capabilities to integrate with databases and connectivity integrations with things like Kafka and things like that. But we've since started to build more product ecosystem around that MQTT platform with things like HiveMQ Edge to connect to PLCs, Data Hub that kind of like does the validation of the data in flight. And recently, the one that we launched this day is HiveMQ Pulse, which is a layer on top of this MQTT traffic to sort of like, provide some governance and contextualization of the data. And this is basically the direction that we are headed as HiveMQ in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, let me kick off with a question. And the question is about the either or, right? You mentioned that MQTT came into play, especially in industrial automation and automotive, just recently. Well, like 10-ish year is recently at our scales, right? MQTT has been a IoT protocol mainly, and that's, in my opinion, one of the reasons why industrial automation and automotive, which have been around for some time already and need to have longer life cycles for their products. You put out a robotic arm or a conveyor belt, it will be there for 20 years and need to work for 10, 20 years. And so you don't change things too often. But my question is, there is a slew of these protocols that the OT world has been using, BACnet, Modbus, CAN, OPC UA. More recently, MQTT seems to be yet another one. So can you actually counter that and tell me, is MQTT a complement? Is it a replacement? Is it better? What is your take on MQTT versus what I would call legacy or modern, but more of the OT protocols out there?
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate that with every hype or buzzword, they tends to come some confusions around what a protocol is best suited for or what it should be used for, and that's the case with MQTT because it's something that has been adopted massively in the industrial space, and then there's kind of like this misconception about whether it's meant to replace legacy protocols or field bus protocols, which is certainly not the case, right? It's still this layered approach to your connectivity pipeline. And actually for interest sake, actually MQTT is more legacy than OPC UA because MQTT was invented in 1999. OPC UA was, I think, 2008. So kind of like looking at it from that perspective, MQTT is older than. So it is in my view, not even a matter of whether it's legacy or not legacy. It's about, the right, protocol for the job. And for OPC UA, I wouldn't really, call it a protocol, as it is more of a standard for modeling data, which happens to have, mechanism for transporting that information, which includes obviously different, HTTP and also MQTT with the OPC UA PubSub. But still, that landscape of connectivity still remains untouched today, where you still have your field bus communication protocol. You mentioned a robotic arm. You cannot, control a robotic arm using MQTT. You still need those, closed loop process control, protocols, your field bus communication protocol that allow you to really, control things in a work cell, in a production environment, and be able to have that deterministic communication involved. And then where MQTT comes into this picture is where you then need to grab that data and then integrate it with IT systems, or kind of like do this enterprise-wide integration. So you still have that, that cake, as it were, where you have your true legacy communication protocols like Modbus, right at the bottom, where you still have this communication with these machines, and then you've got OPC UA a level up, doing the aggregation from all these field bus or legacy field bus protocols into a more modern, protocol, where you're able to then kind of like model the data and then expose it to higher level systems, which is then MQTT takes that over and consumes data from the OPC UA interfaces and then integrates it with the IT. So you still have those, different layers if you're doing it right. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always
Yeah.
interesting. You mentioned the different layers and that, and you talk about how there's established brands or established protocols out there that I think one thing everybody's kind of worried whenever we talk about industrial communications is sort of sample rate, how well the data can get across. But we look back to some of these field buses. I mean, they're running 1931 kbps. Really slow. MQTT is going to be a lot quicker than that, and even OPC UA in that. Do you see there being some issues with some of the backward compatibility when you start to stretch further down into that stack?
Yeah, and I think it's a very interesting, space, and OPC UA is in a way attempting to replace all those protocols with OPC UA field exchange. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that term. Basically, kind of like standardize the field level communication, and they are, incorporating technologies like time sensitive networking, which gives you that, deterministic control in this, high throughput rate. So still, I wouldn't, put MQTT, despite its speed, in that field level communication. MQTT still goes a level up, but OPC UA is the one that is reaching lower into that stack to provide that standardized communication. But frankly, I think I see because there's a lot of at stake here. In my view, in as much as we may view these as legacy protocols, these vendors still have an incentive to keep this in place, right? So opening up the space for them, obviously, it's a kind of like disrupt their business model, right? So up until they start to think about how to change their business models to support more open standard communication, will they start to accept things like OPC UA field level communication? I mean, I mentioned that OPC UA was founded in 2008. But it's only, recently that even the major PLC brands started to even implement, OPC UA. So that in itself speaks volumes that sometimes you may think that the problem is technical, but it's not always the case, right? The technology is already there, but you still need to solve that cultural aspect of it, of, wanting to really open up the space and, bring all
Yep.
these protocols to that level.
Yeah, that's funny you bring up the cultural aspects of things, right? Because we talk a lot about the chasm between OT and IT worlds. MQTT very much feels like a protocol that comes from the IT world in many ways, right? Because That's something that bridges to the cloud. There's many MQTT brokers that are actually in the cloud, and you can have communication between, your on-premises stuff if they have the right ports open, connects to that MQTT broker in the cloud. So that kind of bridges the worlds, or it could be also locally in your enterprise network, right? But MQTT feels like it's a good way for bridging these two worlds, and really open up the world of OT to the world of IT. And well, first I wanted to have your opinion on that. I know this concept of chasm between OT and IT might be something that, it's a bit getting old, but that's a reality. We're seeing that day after day, where we have not conflict, but different cultures, and hard time having one understanding really the other one, and trying to bridge the two. I've seen two dimensions that were problematic, in my opinion. One was the lower layer protocols that we're using, because there's a security condition or consideration there. There's which protocols will traverse, over the internet, and then there's also the security aspects of things. So, do you think like there is something to say about MQTT being a good candidate for bridging these worlds, kind of organizing the data down there? We'll talk about UNS certainly at some point, but organizing the data down there on premises and bridge to the world of IT, whether local enterprise or cloud or both, with a security layer on top. Is MQTT good for that, prone for that? Do you think it's a great candidate for helping that bridging?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So MQTT, what it does, is really decouple, communication between OT and IT. And back to your point of that, cultural friction. So I deal a lot with, customers, both from the OT and IT side, because in many cases for digital transformation, there's always a team that is set up with, members from both sides of the divide. And from the OT side, the biggest friction is always about, that shift to thinking about data acquisition as a way of, clients or servers reaching down, to collect data. So having them kind of like think, shift their mindset to, thinking about publishing, all right, rather sharing data. It's a big shift for them. So the big question that always comes up is to say, but now do I have to change, my architecture, right? Because if I'm going to bring MQTT to, the whether plant IT or really, level 2, it means that I need to change my architecture. But for many cases, MQTT really is an abstraction, right? It's kind of like, works on top of that abstraction layer, where in many cases it sits at that DMZ layer. So that for many customers, it's like level 3.5. And then it exposes that one outbound port going to the cloud. And that's a different scenario altogether compared to a situation where, for example, you've got an OPC UA servers, you've got like OPC UA servers across your shop floor, and you want to expose that data to a cloud or IT, then it means you've got all these pods open. So that kind of like increases the attack surface. But with MQTT, you've got that one outbound port going. So MQTT naturally, becomes that, diode, that data diode that sits in the DMZ, connecting or collecting data from the OT and then interfacing with the IT on the other side of things. So yeah, I mean, I hope that answers your question. But really, I see MQTT as that, data diode, and also with things like role-based access control, because the other issue obviously that comes up is to say, but if I've got all of my data sitting in that one broker, I mean, typically when we segment networks within the industrial environment, we want to be able to determine who gets to access what, or which system gets to access what, right? So you're still able to do that fine-grained control of who gets to access data from which part of the shop floor, based on how it is organized within that MQTT hierarchy, using your access control list or role-based access control.
I mean, we talked
Well,
about
you're bringing.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, sorry, Ryan. I would just want to, like, in that train of thought, you're just bringing something very naturally. You're talking about RBAC, you're talking about things that come from the world of IT. I don't want to continue there, but I do actually. So, we're bringing IT technology that have been out there for 50 years and evolving and enhancing and so on, which is great, especially for security. You just mentioned, on the way, this notion of access permission for individuals or for machines, actually. Instead of reinventing the wheel on the OT side of things that used to be air gaps, so didn't really need to have such a granular level of control over permissions. Now we're bringing that data to the world of IT. We're exposing to security threats potentially, right? We're exposing that to the world. The air gap is now pierced. And we can leverage IT tools, especially the ones for authentication, identity management, and so on, and apply them. But it does require having an underlying infrastructure, a way of organizing data that is more modern, that is something that MQTT will definitely deliver, and the various implementation of MQTT will offer and allow. So just wanted to double click on this one real quick. And Ryan, sorry for interrupting you. So if you want to go ahead on this one.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to expand upon that because I think you talked about RBAC, you talked about the technology that's involved, and you said let's not hammer on the OT-IT divide, but there's a real difference in approach to security between the two sides. IT is all CIA, confidentiality, integrity, accessibility. OT usually flips it on its head: accessibility, integrity, confidentiality. I mean, now that we've given these OT guys that just love to share data, these IT tools that really allow them to do that on a massive scale. I mean, are you finding that there's a bit of a, bit of an issue between, or a bit of friction between the two sides? The OT guys really want to make use of all this new technology, share data all over the place, and the IT guys kind of wanting to lock it down a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think this is also basically the reason why we build HiveMQ Pulse, as I mentioned. Basically, it is that layer of governance on top of the unified namespace, because we spoke about, we're going to touch on the unified namespace, but the whole idea of the unified namespace is that you've got, all OT and IT sharing information through that one, common infrastructure. So in that case, you kind of like have a Wild West kind of situation where things are just flying through the broker and you don't really know what's going through the broker. It's hard for you to even trust the data that's going through the broker for you to make decisions based off of that, because you don't know who someone on the shop floor is just experimenting with something. They're just, connecting things up, playing up around with a new tool, and then they're publishing it there. So HiveMQ Pulse kind of like allows you to, put, that governance layer on top of all of that traffic to determine what the data should look like, who should, create what, payload and things like that. But it also, in a way, enforces consistent structure of the data model across your entire enterprise in a way that you've got this trustworthy source of information. But also at the same time, the flip side of it is that unified namespace is really, gained a lot of favor because of the flexibility or that agility of being able to, do this bottom-up integration of data, where if I've got a problem that I want to solve, I want to be able to, solve it and then integrate the data up the stack. I don't want IT to always, control how or what I should, be working with, because they don't really know what problems I'm trying to solve at any given instance, right? So it's a delicate balance also that we sort of like, tried to strike there. That's why we also have this bottom-up and top-down enforcement of governance as it were.
Yep. So there's an interesting, point and follow-up here in my mind, which is distribution of data and logics, right? We've seen in the past this notion of, things happening and generating data at the edge and sending everything to the cloud, where like there's big data and you have big tools for not just storing, but organizing the data, analyzing it, and so on. For many reasons, confidentiality, security, or for, bandwidth usage, which is not, free to send data over to the cloud. we need to keep more of that data on the edge. We also need to have low latency when it comes to making decision based on the insight extracted from that data, that raw data coming from devices, sensors, and whatnot. Is MQTT and UNS on top something that can allow you to, in a smart way, distribute the storage and intelligence of your data in a way that is simple, in a way that doesn't require understanding everything under the hoods? Because in reality, we're seeing more and more of the AI coming to the edge or extracting the insights from sensors data, because we don't want to send all that data up to the cloud. It's too expensive. It's too slow. We want to treat things down there. Are MQTT and UNS on top things that can help, and how can they help in distributing that intelligence and that storage of data to the edge?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, that's a good point. And again, it's really the core philosophy of the unified namespace. At least in my perspective, that the idea that you're going to if you need to solve a problem, you're going to bring a data engineer from the IT and say, hey, I need to monitor this line, and I need to sort of like calculate, for example, OEE in an hourly rate, and then the data engineer or the data scientist needs to come from the IT and then kind of like sit with you there and then start to collect all of this data. That is a lengthy and expensive process, and the IT quickly becomes a bottleneck, right? Because you can't scale that, right? You want to be able to to be empowered to solve local problems without having to wait for the data to hit your sort of like your data lake or data warehouse, where you can then start to extract insights from there. So the whole ecosystem of unified namespace and MQTT is really built around this edge-driven intelligence, where you sort of like give the OT users these self-serve tools that allow them to contextualize the data for the purpose of solving local problems, right? Because if ultimately what you get to get in the IT on the central side of things is what's happening on the operations, right? And then you start to aggregate on that and start to get insights. But first of all, you want to be able to empower the OT users to be able to solve problems instantly. And this is also again it's going to sound like I'm really promoting HiveMQ Pulse here. This is
Go
because
ahead. Go ahead. It's a good solution. Go ahead.
exactly, because this is, as you may know, HiveMQ is really pioneers as far as the unified namespace is concerned. I don't think there's any company on earth right now that has got a lot more customers who are implementing the unified namespace using any other technology than HiveMQ. So what that has allowed HiveMQ to do is to kind of like get a real time feedback where rubber meets the road, right? Because a whole lot of this stuff is more theoretical. At least it was theoretical in the beginning, or you could change your architecture like that. But as we started to get a lot more customers using this, concerns like what you've just raised, Olivier, came up to say, but how do we sort of like distribute that intelligence? How do we allow the distribution of insights at the edge? So that's precisely what HiveMQ Pulse does. It has got this idea of agents, not an AI agent, but rather an intelligent agent that is deployed right down to the shop floor, different levels of the stack, whether it's on level 2, level 3, where at an IT level you can define and say, okay, this is how we want to generate insights for OEE. You define this is what OEE needs to look like, because now it needs to be consistent across your entire enterprise. And then you roll that out to the edge. The edge agent is the one that is then responsible to look at the rules that have been defined by IT, look at the calculations that have been sort of like prescribed by IT, and then act on those, on the data, on the fly, before it even leaves. And in some cases, there won't even be need to send all of that data out, because it has served its purpose, and then it's
Yeah.
sort of like helps that. And this is basically what the whole drive of the unified namespace is about. So local, problems, local solutions, and then all of that gets aggregated to the cloud or the central IT team to then start to make a sense of it on a broader scale.
which I think is great, but I think you guys are causing a problem. And like you said, MQTT, HiveMQ, you guys have been really well associated with UNS. UNS is a great tool, especially when it comes to doing these massive expansion projects. But I think you've caused it to be too easy to do this data integration, which brings up and I can't remember the name of the damn thing. I was racking my brain for a little bit. There's a paradox that basically says the easier it gets to use something, the more it gets used, the bigger the problem ends up becoming. So one quick question and one long question to follow it up. First quick question. What would you say is, like, from an endpoint standpoint, what's your biggest installation at HiveMQ? In a ballpark.
Yeah, I think we've got a gas company in the US. I think they're doing something in the ranges of, or I could be wrong, like 500 million, messages that are, going through the broker, and the SLA is like 1 second, 2 seconds. So I could be totally wrong about the specific because I don't have those ones handy. But just to give you a sense of the amount of traffic that HiveMQ is handling.
Which is, I mean, it's crazy. So the big question is, okay, if you have this thing, and you mentioned OEE before, where you want to create a structured OEE, and this has been one of the knocks against OEE forever, is, you get 20 different plants, there's going to be 20 different OEE calculations. How do you guys, like, what do you see as, or, what strategies do you see your customers or other companies out there using to organize and standardize their data coming off the factory floor?
So, so HiveMQ, as you may know, or really, Unified Namespace is an architecture that, obviously, as you pointed out, when you look at the graphics, on LinkedIn or everywhere, it's this circle, the broker in the middle, and everything plugging into that. But that's oversimplification, right? There's a whole lot more tooling around it. There's a whole lot more stages between getting data from the unified namespace and in actually getting value. So, for example, you don't get historical data from the broker. You still need to persist that somewhere. You still need to have a common data model that links everything that's currently going through the broker, that's coming from the historian, that's coming from the CMMS system. So you still need a whole lot more ecosystem around the unified namespace for you to really get value out of that. But part of the tooling that I was talking about, if you look at platforms like Ignition that allow you to standardize on the payload or the structure, using like UDTs. And then you've got, applications like HiByte that also give you that, ability to model information. So typically you have a central IT team sort of like defining those data structures to say, this is what, an OEE sort of like should look like. These are the properties that should, consist a compressor, and so on and so forth, based on the analytic ambitions that they have. And then they then roll out these tools to the OT to have the OT do the mapping from whatever exists. Because in many cases, as you may know, you have different systems put in by different integrators. So it's not an easy process to really standardize across all the entire, deployment. So you then have that, OT team being responsible for mapping to this globally defined data structure or KPI. So you still have, KPIs defined at a high level and then rolled down at the edge for enforcement.
Do you find that this is usually the structure, a lot of the governance is still left to IT? Is it just because IT has that experience dealing on such large applications and large structures?
No, not necessarily. So, because for IT, the ambitions really is to get a consistent representation of information from wherever it's coming from. So for them, that's the biggest, interest, right? But at the same time, a different site or different line may not really be interested in knowing what's happening on the on the other side. So they only want to sort of like create data in a way that they know how to consume it. So the IT team is obviously incentivized to make sure that everyone conforms to a consistent structure, so that it helps the AI model training, it helps the analytics, it helps the correlations, and all the different analytic ambitions that they may have. So that's why we still have this top down approach to prescribing how data should be structured. But the unified namespace, I think if you kind of like you've been following some of the stuff that Walker Reynolds has been talking about, is more sort of like recognizes these two namespaces where you've got the blue and the red, where the red is the governed stuff, right? This stuff that is being defined from the IT side and enforced on the shop floor. But the blue is more like a local namespace created to solve local problems. It doesn't need to end up in IT, right? And then once it's been proven, so maybe one side actually gets a win that actually they've cracked this problem, they've solved this problem, then it gets sort of like promoted or sort of like into more IT data structure, and then it is rolled out everywhere. So that still allows that ability to experiment, because most of data use case is really experimentation, right? You don't really know how you're going to solve a problem. You want to be able to experiment, right? And have that agility to try things out. If it doesn't work, try something else. And you can't do that with the top down enforcement, right? You want to have that flexibility. So unified namespace gives you that flexibility to experiment, and then once you've proven that a use case, it can then be sort of like rolled out in a scalable way. And that's the biggest promise of a unified namespace, because you're plugging into an infrastructure, you're not connecting applications to devices. So because you're plugging into infrastructure, which means you're abstracting the complexity away. So what you prove on one line can easily be replicated on another line, because all you need to do is to plug into that same infrastructure. You don't need to connect to different systems directly and things like that.
Yep. Yeah, and when you said red and blue colors, I immediately thought about the Matrix and get the right pill. It's not an either or though here, right? It's definitely the both of them. You're marrying them. You have to take into account the cultures, the types of data, the angle. Like OT doesn't have the same angle as IT, even though it might seem like weird because they all work together in the same company with the same objective, but they don't have the same objectives individually, and so they don't need the same insights into the data, or they don't want to use it the same way. So let me ask you this, right? Blue pill, red pill. Let's look at the future, and what's your perspective on this adoption? When I first heard about UNS, I immediately thought, oh, that's going to solve the problem we're having with digital twins, trying to sort out the problem of modeling the data versus getting data already with models, like in some industries with existing ontologies. There's nothing as an ontology that we have for smart buildings like brick or things like that for the world of industrial automation. And so when I first heard about UNS, I was like, oh, that could be an interesting way of establishing an ontology so that digital twins then can make sense of this data because it comes already pre-modeled. And now I can implement my twin. I can simulate, you were talking about experimentation, I can simulate my factory because I have very rich models now. And now I can implement AI and simulation on top of that, and really, predict how things will behave, how things will produce, and so forth. Do you think that vision is coming closer? Do you think, looking ahead, UNS is making strides and is being adopted? Do you think that's something that's going to be short, midterm, long term? When are we going to stop talking about it? Because, technologies, usually we stop talking about them when they were successful or when they failed. So what's your take on what's going to happen in the future?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think, and I think the future is actually already arrived from my conversations with the customers, the community in general, where To your point, unified namespace was, and to some extent still is, this hype, as it were. But I think we've got to a point where we have become more realistic about the unified namespace, right? It's not a silver bullet, and I think we have, to some extent, always, known this, and we've always, been realistic about this. But the one thing about technology is, once you put it out there, and then everyone just picks it up, right? Everyone wants to sort of like, sell, the product, so they just slap the unified namespace label onto it, and then it kind of like just muddies everything. You don't really know what the unified namespace, where does it start, where does it end? But for me, the unified namespace is and will always remain, in that space where it is, a way to, efficiently onboard equipment, and it still, remains in that level 1 up to, level 3, for those, functional hierarchy model, where you're just moving away from direct point-to-point integration to, this pub-sub mechanism of communication, where if you need to onboard a piece of equipment, you don't need to write custom scripts to, specific protocol drivers for a specific MES or for a specific quality system. You just need to point that, data to that common data infrastructure, and then structure it in a way that is semantically understood. And from there, you're not only sort of like making data accessible, you're also allowing orchestration, because that's also a big part of the unified namespace, to that intelligent orchestration, because it's an event-driven architecture, whereby if I'm an MES system, a new or if I'm an ERP system, a new order has been created, I can raise that as an event in that unified namespace, and whatever system is interested in knowing the status of order is always consuming that information and performing whatever action it needs to do. Once it's finished, it then raises an event. I'm finished doing this, and then another system picks that up. So you've got this intelligent orchestration, which also provides, as companies start to talk more about AI agents and things like that, they'll still need to exchange information to orchestrate workflows, manufacturing workflows. So the unified namespace is a natural layer for that. But obviously, you don't get analytics straight out of the box. So you still need to get that information. Where I see the next level on top of that is that operational data intelligence level. So which is this layer that spans across, where the unified namespace plugs into that and sort of like hydrates that operation data intelligence platform with real-time data that has been structured and organized and really cleaned up nicely. And then you still have data coming from, because the reality is, again, you still have companies that have got some historians, and they're not going to change that in a very long time. They still have assets that are connected, that are continuously sort of like persisting information there. But you need to get the data out. Again, you have a data ops layer that cleans that data up from the historian, and then points it also into that operational data intelligence layer. So that layer is then where you then define, because also with the unified namespace, you've got this hierarchical structure. But again, as you know, relationships in manufacturing operations are more complex than that, right? You've got more graphy relationships, right? Site A and site B might be related, in a graphical way, where if site A goes down, it affects site B, but that cannot be reflected, from a hierarchical relationship. So you still need to get that into that layer, where you then consolidate everything into this common data model. And then from there, you do the modeling, and then you export that information to the IT or the enterprise layer, where then everything gets aggregated. So this is, the future, where the unified namespace, as the hype dies, more and more gets to a place where it was supposed to be in the first place, right? Without, people blowing everything out of proportion.
Yep. Yeah. So Ryan, you wanna close us here?
Yeah, no, and I think it was great, and especially the last point there. I think everybody kind of looks at it when everybody thinks of ISA 95. They always go back to the Purdue model and the triangle. What everybody forgets about is the spider web model that comes in and some of the later parts out there. And yeah, it's not it's not as easy as a little two-dimensional pyramid on there, a little triangle. So it's good to see, the UNS companies like HiveMQ, you guys making it easy for the infrastructure to be built. And then once the infrastructure is built, I mean, that really allows things to be done. We've seen many applications where, hey, people try putting in the latest and greatest technology on really poor infrastructure, and it might work once, but doesn't work much after that. So yeah, do appreciate your time today, Kudzai. Thanks for agreeing to come on. It's great to have you on here. And yeah, I think with that, thanks for being part of the Zeroed In community, everybody. Great to have you all. Subscribe, share, keep the conversation going, and join us next time as we zero in on the future of industry.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.